At Morixa Tales, we believe in the power of storytelling. Our scripts weave together deep emotions and dramatic turns to deliver justice where it is most needed. Experience captivating mysteries where the truth eventually shines through, leaving a lasting impact on your heart and mind.
When I arrived at my sister's engagement party at Bellini Restaurant in Chicago, security looked at my clothes and said, "Catering staff goes through the back." I smiled and didn't correct him. Inside, my sister's future mother-in-law whispered, "That's Claire's sister, the one who cooks for a living." Such a shame. They had no idea what I'd built in secret or that their perfect family was collapsing. What they really didn't know who I'd brought with me. By midnight, when those people walked through the door, screams would drown out the music. I'm so grateful you're here. Tell me where you're listening, commuting, cooking, or relaxing. Comment below, quick note. This story includes fictional elements for educational purposes. Any resemblance to real names or places is coincidental, but the message is completely true. October 2021, Chicago's River North neighborhood, 6:30 p.m. on a Friday. The Uber dropped me right in front of Bellini's main entrance, and I knew immediately that tonight wasn't going to go the way my sister expected. The restaurant's facade was all polished brass and Edison bulbs, the kind of calculated rustic chic that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Through the glass doors, I could see the warm glow of the dining room, hear the buzz of conversation and laughter. Somewhere in there, my little sister Claire was celebrating her engagement to a man I'd never met, surrounded by people who thought I was a failure. I adjusted the strap of my bag and headed for the entrance. 18 hours on my feet at Harvest Moon meant my black pants were rumpled. My cashmere sweater had a small stain near the hem that I'd tried to blot out in the bathroom. And my hair was barely holding together in what had started the day as a neat bun. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who'd just finished overseeing a James Beard Foundation dinner for 80 people and had driven straight across the city because family obligations didn't care about your schedule. The security guard stepped into my path before I reached the door. She was young, maybe 25, with the kind of eager energy that comes from taking a job way too seriously. Her eyes traveled from my scuffed flats to my messy hair, and I watched her expression shift from neutral to dismissive in about 3 seconds flat. "Staff entrance is around back," she said, not even trying to hide the judgment in her voice. I blinked at her. "Excuse me, you're with the catering company, right?" She gestured vaguely toward the side of the building. "Service entrance is that way. You'll need to check in with the kitchen manager." For a moment, I just stood there processing the fact that this woman had looked at me and decided I couldn't possibly be a guest, that I must be the help. The irony wasn't lost on me after all I'd spent the first 10 years of my career working my way up from line cook to sous chef to executive chef. I knew what it was like to use the service entrance to be invisible in a room full of people who thought you were there to serve them. What she didn't know was that those days were long behind me. "I'm not with the catering company," I said evenly. "I'm family, Juliet Brennan, the bride's sister." The guard, her name tag read Kelsey Warren, pulled out a clipboard and scanned the list with her finger. "You're not on the VIP list. I wouldn't expect to be, but I am on the guest list." I kept my voice calm, professional. This wasn't worth making a scene over. Not yet, anyway. Kelsey looked up at me skeptical just as the door opened and Claire appeared. My sister looked beautiful. Of course she did. Her honey blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless, her cocktail dress probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. She was the picture of everything our parents had hoped we'd both become: polished, presentable, marrying well. Her eyes landed on me and I watched her face transform. Not with joy or relief at seeing her sister, with mortification. "Juliet." Her voice was bright but brittle. "You're here, and dressed like that." Not, "I'm so glad you made it." Not, "I've missed you." Just commentary on my appearance delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I came straight from work," I said. "We had a James Beard event tonight." "Right, your restaurant." Claire turned to Kelsey. "She's fine, let her in." The way she said it let her in like she was doing me a favor, like I should be grateful she was allowing me into her special night. I followed Claire through the entrance, nodding politely at Kelsey, who still looked suspicious. The moment we stepped into Bellini's, my professional instincts kicked in automatically. The dining room was beautiful, I'd give them that, but the table spacing was too tight. Guests would be bumping elbows all night. The wine display near the bar was positioned wrong. Bottles were sitting in direct light, probably already warming past optimal temperature. And the music was slightly too loud for conversation, which meant people would start shouting by the second course. Amateur mistakes. The kind that someone who really knew restaurants would never make. We walked through the main dining room past tables full of guests who glanced up at us, or rather at Claire, with warm smiles and congratulations. I was barely a shadow behind her, the sister who didn't quite fit. Above the bar hung a banner in elegant script, "Congratulations, Claire and Griffin." The private event space opened up before us, already packed with people. At the center of the room, holding court like visiting royalty, stood an older couple. The man was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that drew attention without effort. The woman beside him was elegant in a cream suit, her pearls probably real, her posture perfect. Claire's future in-laws. It had to be. Juliet? I turned to find my parents making their way over. Mom looked beautiful in navy silk, Dad distinguished in his suit. They both wore the same expression, that careful, controlled smile that said they were glad I'd come, but wished I'd tried harder with my appearance. "Hi, Mom, Dad." I leaned in for the obligatory air kisses. "You look tired, sweetheart," Mom said, concern and criticism wrapped in the same gentle tone. "Long shift at the diner." "Restaurant, Mom?" "Fine dining restaurant, and yes, we just hosted a James Beard Foundation event." I'd corrected her on this approximately 100 times. She still couldn't seem to remember that I wasn't working at some corner diner. "That's nice, dear." She patted my arm absently, already looking past me toward Claire and the Hayes family. Dad pulled me slightly aside, his grip on my elbow firmer than necessary. "Listen, there's something you should know. The Hayes family is in the middle of a lawsuit. They're suing a chef, Stella Brennan, Italian woman apparently trained with her grandmother, just like you did with Nonna Bianca." My heart stopped. Just for a second, but it stopped. They were suing me. The Hayes family was suing me, and they had no idea that I was standing right here. "Have you heard of her?" Dad continued, watching my face carefully. "This Stella Brennan." I kept my expression neutral, years of kitchen discipline keeping my emotions in check. "I've heard the name." Dad's eyes narrowed slightly. "If you know something about her, you'd tell us, wouldn't you?" And there it was. The question he couldn't quite bring himself to ask directly. The suspicion he'd been harboring but was too afraid to confirm. Did they know? Had they figured it out? "Dad, Well, the other Brennan daughter." The voice cut across the room loud enough that conversations nearby stuttered and stopped. I turned slowly, already knowing what I'd see. Victor Hayes stood across the event space, holding a glass of wine, surrounded by a group of well-dressed guests who laughed at his announcement. His eyes were on me, assessing, dismissive. The same look Kelsey, the security guard, had given me, but with an extra layer of entitled cruelty. "The working class one." He said it like a punchline, and more laughter rippled through his audience. I met his eyes across the room, and something cold settled in my chest. I knew that face. I'd seen it before in photographs tucked in the back of Nonna Bianca's old recipe journal. Pictures from the 1980s from Nonna's table in Little Italy, when her restaurant was just starting to get attention. A younger Victor Hayes back then, just another wannabe restaurateur hanging around the kitchen asking questions, taking notes. The pieces were clicking into place faster than I wanted them to. Victor Hayes didn't just know about good Italian cooking. He'd learned it from my grandmother. And now he was here suing the granddaughter who'd actually inherited her recipes, claiming they belonged to him. I smiled slowly, the kind of smile that would have made anyone who really knew me very nervous. This was going to be a long night. Less than 10 minutes after that humiliating entrance, Claire had already dragged me toward the bar, where the Hayes family held court like restaurant royalty. If only they knew the truth about their empire. My sister's grip on my elbow was tight, her smile brittle as we approached the couple who'd just publicly mocked me across the room. I could feel her anxiety radiating off her in waves. Claire had spent her entire life trying to smooth over awkward moments, to make everything appear perfect, even when it was falling apart. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes." Claire said, her voice pitched slightly too high. This is my older sister, Juliet. Juliet, these are Griffin's parents, Victor and Lorraine Hayes. Victor Hayes looked at me the way a jeweler might examine a fake diamond with professional disdain and zero effort to hide it. Up close, he was even more imposing than he'd seemed from across the room. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confident posture that came from years of people believing whatever he told them. "So you're the chef." His smile had sharp edges. "Claire mentioned you work at, what was it? Some little bistro." The word little carried so much condescension, it was almost impressive. "I work in the restaurant industry, yes." I kept my answer vague, watched his eyes glaze over with disinterest. To him, I'd just confirmed that I was exactly what he'd assumed, unremarkable, unsuccessful, unworthy of further attention. Perfect. Well, isn't that charming? Victor turned slightly, addressing not just me, but the small audience that had gathered around the bar. This was a man who lived for an audience. "You know, the Hayes family comes from a prestigious restaurant lineage ourselves. We had 3 legendary establishments." I noticed immediately that he'd used past tense. Had, not have. My family's Italian roots run deep. Victor continued, warming to his subject. His hand moved expressively, the gesture probably something he'd seen in a movie about Italian families. "Restaurant excellence is in our blood. Hayes Tavern back in 2003, Victor's American Table in 2008, and the Hayes House in 2015, all of them were fixtures in their communities. Beautiful places. Award-nominated, not award-winning. And all 3 restaurants mentioned in past tense, their closures glossed over with nostalgic language and confident delivery. I'd done my research on Victor Hayes years ago when I first heard his name connected to Nonna Bianca's old restaurant. I knew exactly what had happened to those 3 establishments: health code violations, tax liens, and bankruptcy in that order. Lorraine Hayes leaned in her pearls, catching the light. Everything about her screamed calculated elegance: the cream suit, the perfectly styled silver hair, the jewelry that looked expensive, but was probably just expensive looking. She had the smile of someone who'd perfected the art of looking warm while delivering ice-cold assessments. "It's wonderful that Claire is so accomplished in her career," Lorraine said sweetly, her eyes sliding toward me with surgical precision. "Some people are just born with that drive, you know, that hunger for success." The implication hung in the air like smoke, and some people aren't. Claire made a small, desperate sound beside me, probably praying I wouldn't make a scene. I could have told her she had nothing to worry about. I'd spent 15 years in professional kitchens where chefs threw knives and hurled insults that would make Victor Hayes cry. This was nothing. "Juliet." The voice came from behind us, and I turned to see a tall man with dark hair and an open, genuinely warm smile making his way through the crowd. He had Victor's build, but none of his calculated sharpness. Where Victor's eyes assessed and dismissed, this man's eyes actually saw people. "Griffin Hayes, the man my sister was going to marry." "You must be Claire's sister," he said, extending his hand. "Griffin Hayes, I'm so glad you could make it. Claire talks about you all the time." His handshake was firm, his smile sincere. I found myself instantly liking him, which was going to make what came next more complicated than I'd anticipated. "Nice to meet you," I said and meant it. Griffin glanced at his parents, then back at me, and I caught something in his expression, apology maybe, or embarrassment. "I'm sorry about my parents," he said quietly. "They can be a lot." "Griffin." Lorraine's voice had a sharp edge. "We were just telling Juliet about the family's restaurant heritage. Actually," Victor said, raising his voice deliberately, making sure everyone at the bar could hear. "We were discussing our current legal situation. We're in the process of protecting our legacy." Here it comes, I thought. That's right. Victor continued, his voice carrying across the space. "A major lawsuit against a fraudulent chef, Stella Brennan. Perhaps you've heard of her, Juliet, since you're in the industry." Every muscle in my body stayed relaxed. Years of kitchen training had taught me how to keep my face neutral while chaos erupted around me. "I've heard the name." "She's a thief," Lorraine added, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. "Stole multi-generational family recipes, our recipes, and built her career on our heritage." Victor was on a roll now, feeding off the attention of the growing crowd. Ossobuco risotto Milanese tiramisu dishes that have been in the Hayes family for generations. Recipes passed down from my grandfather in Sicily, stolen by this con artist, and passed off as her own creations for profit. Sicily. I almost laughed. Victor Hayes' family was from Cleveland, Ohio. I'd seen his birth certificate in the background check my PI ran 3 years ago after his name first came up in connection with Nonna Bianca's restaurant. His grandfather had owned a hardware store in Akron. And those recipes he was claiming as his family's legacy, I'd learned them at Nonna Bianca's knee in her tiny Brooklyn kitchen when I was 8 years old. My grandmother, who actually was from Italy, actually had learned those dishes from her mother, actually had built Nonna's table in Little Italy with her own hands and her own recipes in the 1980s. The same restaurant where a young Victor Hayes had worked briefly as a line cook in 1984, before getting fired for showing up drunk and stealing from the register. She's making millions off our family's heritage, Victor said, his face reddening with performed outrage. Millions, while we're left with nothing but the theft of our good name. The guests around us murmured sympathetically. Some nodded. A few looked genuinely angry on the Hayes family's behalf. It was a good performance. I had to give him that. Victor leaned toward me, his eyes challenging. So do you know this Stella Brennan? I met his gaze steadily, let the moment stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. I'm very familiar with Stella Brennan's work, I said clearly. Intimately familiar, actually. Victor's smile widened triumphant. He'd misread me completely. So you agree she's a thief, someone who's appropriated someone else's legacy for her own gain? My smile didn't reach my eyes. I didn't say that, Mr. Hayes. I said I'm intimately familiar with her work. The difference in phrasing was subtle, but something in my tone made the air shift. Griffin glanced between us, suddenly alert. Lorraine's eyes narrowed. Victor opened his mouth to respond, but Claire jumped in her voice, too bright, too loud. Photo time, Griffin. We need to get photos with your college friends before they leave. She grabbed Griffin's arm, practically dragging him away from the bar. Other guests began to disperse, sensing the tension, not wanting to be caught in whatever was brewing. But Victor and I remained locked in our stare-down. I could see him trying to work out what I'd meant, whether I'd just agreed with him or challenged him. His ego was too big to let him see the truth that the woman he'd just spent 10 minutes insulting and dismissing was the same person he was suing for $50 million. Lorraine stayed beside her husband, but her eyes were on me, calculating, suspicious. She didn't believe me. Her instincts were better than her husband's, sharper, less clouded by ego. She sensed something wasn't right, that I wasn't what I appeared to be. Good instinct. Too bad it wasn't going to save her. 30 minutes into cocktail hour, Lorraine Hayes solved my problem for me. She sent me to the kitchen. If she'd known what I would find there, she would have locked me in the wine cellar instead. I saw her coming, that practiced smile plastered across her face. I've been standing near the windows, watching reflected movements, an old kitchen habit, always know where everyone is. Sweetheart, Lorraine said, voice dripping false warmth. The catering team seems overwhelmed. Since you work in kitchens, would you mind lending a hand? It wasn't a question. It was an elegant dismissal. Claire appeared at my elbow, flushed. Mom Hayes, you don't have to. I'm happy to help, I said smoothly. Claire looked relieved and mortified, but didn't argue. She never did. Lorraine had just given me exactly what I needed, legitimate access to the kitchen, where all the real secrets lived. The front of house is performance. The kitchen is truth. I pushed through the swinging doors at 7:47 p.m. into controlled chaos. Bellini's kitchen was high-end Chicago, trying too hard. Gleaming steel flames, leaping voices, shouting in Spanish and English. Heat hit. First then smells garlic butter wine reducing meat searing. My chef's eye cataloged everything instantly. Prep timing was off. Expediting was a disaster, tickets piling up too fast. Plating area had plates stacked wrong. And something else. Something wrong. No, that risotto is ruined. Start over. The voice cut through the noise, and my heart dropped. I knew that voice. I ducked into shadow near the walk-in freezer and watched. The executive chef was early 30s, tall and lean, moving with controlled intensity. Dark hair under a pristine white chef's hat, precise movements as he tasted from a pan, grimaced, handed it back to a terrified line cook, Santiago Rivera. I'd last seen him 5 years ago walking out of Harvest Moon after a screaming match about menu credit. He'd trained under me under Stella Brennan for 2 years. Talented, ambitious bidder that he'd always be known as one of Stella's protégés. We'd parted badly. He'd wanted his name on dishes he'd only assisted with. I'd refused. He'd called me a glory hog. I'd called him ungrateful. He'd thrown his chef's coat on my desk and walked out. Now here he was, executive chef at Bellini's, running the kitchen for my sister's engagement party. The universe had a sick sense of humor. I watched him work, noting the shortcuts he took, techniques I'd specifically taught him never to use, except in emergencies. Something was very wrong. Santiago's phone buzzed. He said something sharp to his sous chef and disappeared into the walk-in freezer. I didn't think, I just moved. The walk-in's door was heavy steel, but there was a gap near the hinges where sound carried. I pressed against the wall and listened. I told you, Jasper, the plan's still on schedule. Santiago's voice was muffled but clear. By dessert, half the party's going to have stomach issues. Nothing fatal, just enough to ruin the night. My blood turned to ice. A male voice responded through the phone, Jasper Monroe Bellini's owner, my biggest competitor. And you're sure it'll be blamed on Stella Brennan's style? Trust me, Santiago said with satisfaction. When word gets out that a Stella Brennan-inspired event ended with food poisoning, her reputation is finished. Your rival disappears and I finally step out of her shadow. Everybody wins, except the guests. They'll survive. Mild food poisoning, nothing serious, just enough to make headlines and destroy her credibility. They were sabotaging my sister's engagement party, using Claire's celebration to destroy Stella Brennan's reputation. And Santiago, my former protégé, someone I'd trained and trusted, was executing it. The call ended. I heard Santiago moving. I didn't have time to hide, so I stepped into the walk-in freezer. Hello, Santiago. He spun around, eyes wide. The LED lights cast harsh shadows as he stared, trying to place me. I wasn't wearing a chef's coat. My hair was down. Do I know you? His voice was wary. You're not kitchen staff. You should know me. You interned under me for 2 years. I watched recognition dawn. Disbelief, then shock, then fear. Chef, Stella. Barely a whisper. I nodded. We stood there in the cold LED lights, humming kitchen sounds muffled beyond the door. Then Santiago's shock transformed into rage that had been simmering for 5 years. You're the sister. His voice rose. Claire's sister, Juliet. I nodded again. His face hardened. Even better. You destroyed my career. Everything I did, every dish I created, it all disappeared into your shadow. Another brilliant creation from Stella Brennan. Never Santiago Rivera, always you. He moved toward the door, and I realized too late what he was going to do. Your shadow destroyed me, he said, hand on the handle. Let's see how you like being the one left in the cold. He stepped out. I lunged forward, but the heavy door was already swinging shut. The lock clicked from the outside. The seal engaged with a hiss. I hit the door with both palms, tried the interior handle. Nothing. The emergency release required by health code had been removed or was broken. The temperature gauge read 37ers and dropping. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Walk-in freezers were metal boxes cell signals didn't penetrate. I was trapped in an industrial freezer locked in by my former protégé while he executed a plan to poison my sister's engagement party to destroy my reputation. Well, this was new. 5 minutes in a commercial walk-in teaches you something about yourself. Either you panic or you plan. I've never been the panicking type. The temperature gauge read 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to be uncomfortable, not yet cold enough to be dangerous. I had time. Not a lot of it, but enough. I'd spent those first 5 minutes doing what I always did in a crisis, assessing the situation with surgical precision. The walk-in was standard commercial size, maybe 8 by 10 feet, lined with metal shelving stocked with prepped ingredients. The LED lights cast everything in harsh white. The air smelled like cold metal and preserved herbs. And there, exactly where building code required it to be, was the interior emergency release handle. Bright red, impossible to miss, right there on the wall beside the door. I could walk out right now, march back into that kitchen, confront Santiago in front of his entire staff, expose his plan to poison my sister's engagement party. But I didn't move toward the handle. Instead, I moved toward the small window set into the door, the kind required for safety, so people could see in and out. The glass was fogged with condensation, but I could still make out shapes and movement in the kitchen beyond. Santiago was at the main prep station, gesturing to a young line cook I didn't recognize. Her name tag read Lucia Ramirez. She nodded eagerly at whatever he was telling her, that earnest expression of someone who genuinely wanted to do good work and please the executive chef. I pressed closer to the window, my breath fogging the glass further, and watched. Santiago picked up a large container, one of the industrial Combro containers every professional kitchen used for sauces and prep. He handed it to Lucia with deliberate care, saying something I couldn't hear through the insulated door. But I could read his lips well enough. "Make sure the Brennan party tables get plates from this batch. VIP treatment." Lucia smiled, nodded, took the container toward the plating station. That was it. That was the contaminated batch, labeled and designated specifically for my family's tables. My hands curled into fists, the cold air burned in my lungs. I could stop this right now. Walk out there, dump that container, blow Santiago's entire plan apart in front of witnesses. But then what, he'd deny everything. Claim it was a misunderstanding, that I was a jealous former employer trying to sabotage his career. Jasper Monroe would back him up. Lorraine and Victor Hayes would believe their venue's chef over the working-class sister who'd been caught sneaking around the kitchen. And I'd have shown my hand without getting anything in return. No. If I was going to destroy Santiago Rivera and expose this entire conspiracy, I needed more than accusations. I needed evidence. I needed to see the full scope of what they were planning. I needed to be smart about this. My hand moved to the emergency release, but I didn't pull it yet. Instead, I watched for 3 more minutes, tracking Santiago's movements through the kitchen. I watched him return to the stove, pick up a ladle, taste something from a large sauce pot. Watched him glance around to make sure no one was paying attention, then reach into his jacket pocket and add something to the pot. Just a quick motion, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Deliberate contamination. Not enough to be fatal, he'd been clear about that on the phone. Just enough to cause stomach issues. Just enough to ruin the night and destroy Stella Brennan's reputation when word got out that a party featuring her style of cuisine ended in mass food poisoning. I pulled the emergency release. The lock disengaged with a soft click, and I pushed the heavy door open just wide enough to slip through. The blast of hot kitchen air hit me after the freezing cold, and I had to resist the urge to gasp at the temperature change. Nobody noticed me. The kitchen was too busy, too loud, too focused on the controlled chaos of service. I moved quickly along the back wall, staying in the blind spots until I reached the darker corner behind the prep station. From here, I had a clear view of Santiago's workspace, and from here, my phone had a signal. I pulled it out, kept it low, and started taking photos. The angle was awkward. I had to shoot around equipment and through gaps in the shelving, but I got what I needed. Santiago's face clearly visible. The sauce pot. The container labeled VIP in blue painter's tape. The timestamp would prove when this happened during Claire's engagement party. Evidence. Santiago turned away from the stove, calling over his sous chef, a thin man with sharp features and a French accent. The name embroidered on his chef's coat read, Bastien Mercier. "The VIP batch is ready." Santiago said, his voice just barely audible over the kitchen noise. "Don't let anyone mix it with the regular service. These plates need to be perfect. Special treatment for special guests." Bastien picked up the container, brought it close to his face, sniffed. His expression shifted confusion, maybe concern. "It smells different," he said carefully. "Are you sure the recipe is right?" Santiago's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Trust me, it's a special recipe. Just plate it exactly as I showed you." Bastien hesitated for just a moment, then nodded and carried the container toward the plating area. I watched the contaminated food move through the kitchen pipeline, each station adding components, each cook focused on making beautiful plates. None of them knew they were participating in sabotage. They were just doing their jobs, following the executive chef's orders. My decision crystallized in that moment. I wasn't going to stop the sabotage by confronting Santiago. I was going to stop it by fixing it without anyone knowing. I waited until Santiago stepped away from the line, probably heading to the bathroom or the office for a moment. Then I moved. 15 years in professional kitchens had taught me how to move through a workspace without drawing attention. How to look like you belonged exactly where you were doing exactly what you were doing. I'd seen health inspectors do it, corporate chefs checking up on their locations, consultants evaluating operations. I walked straight to the prep station like I owned it. The VIP container sat exactly where Bastian had left it. I picked it up, carried it with confident purpose toward the back prep area where they kept backup ingredients and test recipes. Set it down on a shelf clearly marked, "Test Kitchen, Do Not Serve." Then I went to the main prep cooler, found the clean batch of the same sauce, and carried it back to the station. Peeled off the VIP label, placed it carefully on the clean container. Swap complete. Santiago's contaminated batch would sit in the test kitchen area until end of shift, when it would be discarded with all the other rejected attempts. The clean batch would go out to my family's tables perfectly safe. Santiago would think his plan had succeeded. He'd be waiting for news of stomach issues, for the scandal to break, for Stella Brennan's reputation to crumble. And when nothing happened, when the party went off without a single health issue, he'd be confused. Then he'd be worried. Then he'd start making mistakes. Meanwhile, I'd have time to build my case, to document everything, to make sure that when I finally destroyed him, it would be complete. I was labeling a third container when I heard the kitchen door swing open behind me. "What are you doing?" Lorraine Hayes' voice cut through the kitchen noise like a blade. I turned my hand still on a tray of risotto and found her standing in the doorway with Victor right behind her. Her face was a mask of suspicion and barely controlled anger. "That is not washing dishes," she said, her voice sharp enough to draw attention from several nearby cooks. I calmly wiped my hands on a kitchen towel, keeping my expression pleasant and helpful. "Just trying to help like you asked Mrs. Hayes." This risotto needed some adjustment. The timing was off on the rice. I noticed it when I was moving through, so I thought I'd fix it before service. The lie came easily, natural. The kind of technical explanation that would satisfy most people who didn't actually understand how a professional kitchen worked. But Lorraine wasn't most people. Her eyes narrowed, scanning my face like she was trying to read something written in a foreign language. Behind her, Victor had gone very still, studying me with a new kind of attention. Not the dismissive assessment from earlier, but genuine curiosity. "You know risotto timing," Lorraine said slowly. Not quite a question, more like she was testing the words, seeing how they sounded. "I've worked in restaurants for 15 years, I said with a modest shrug. "You pick up a few things." The kitchen continued its controlled chaos around us, but I could feel the weight of Lorraine's suspicion, like a physical thing. She knew something wasn't right. Her instincts were telling her that the shabby, unsuccessful sister didn't fit the profile of someone who could casually identify and correct risotto timing issues in a professional kitchen during service. She just couldn't figure out what she was missing. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Lorraine didn't believe my excuse about helping, but she still found a way to use me. 5 minutes later, I was wearing a server's apron and carrying champagne. Perfect. Nobody notices the help. "Since you're already dressed for this kind of work," Lorraine said, her smile sharp as a blade, "you might as well make yourself useful." Bellini's manager, a stressed man in his 40s, who clearly answered directly to Jasper Monroe, hesitated. Putting a guest to work wasn't policy. But Lorraine Hayes carried the confidence of old money and practiced entitlement. He caved in under 30 seconds, handing me a black apron, a tray, and a warning to stay out of the kitchen staff's way. By 8:20 p.m., appetizer service was underway. I moved through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres as if I'd done it all my life, which in a way I had. Every chef starts somewhere. My first 2 years in the industry were spent exactly like this, catering events, serving food to people who looked through me like furniture. I'd hated it then. Tonight it was the perfect cover. People talk freely around servers. We're invisible, part of the background noise of their important moments. They forget we hear, remember, and sometimes pay very close attention. I picked up a fresh tray from the service station and drifted toward the bar where Victor Hayes stood with an elderly man in an expensive but understated suit. Old money. Quiet wealth. I timed my approach carefully, offering appetizers to nearby guests while positioning myself close enough to hear. Once Griffin marries into the Brennan family, Victor said, his voice low but careless, we'll have access to their connections. The sisters' restaurant industry contacts alone must be worth millions. The investor raised an eyebrow. I thought the sister was just a line cook. She is, Victor said smoothly. But 15 years in the industry means suppliers, distributors, chefs. We'll leverage those connections through Griffin. He's marrying into the family, her contacts become ours. My grip tightened on the tray. They weren't just using Claire. They were planning to use me, or rather the working-class chef sister they thought they understood. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so deliberate. Lorraine appeared beside Victor, champagne in hand. And once we win the lawsuit against that Brennan woman, Stella Brennan, Victor corrected. Lorraine waved it off. Once we win, we'll have the capital to restart properly. Victor's already coordinating with attorneys on a new restaurant venture. Griffin doesn't know yet, but we're opening accounts in his name. Best to prepare before announcing it. The investor frowned. You're opening accounts in your son's name without his consent. He'll thank us later, Victor replied. Sometimes parents have to make hard decisions for their children. I moved away before they noticed me lingering. They were using Griffin's identity, his credit, his name to fund ventures he knew nothing about. Fraud, identity theft, and they discussed it casually over cocktails. I circulated the room, serving clearing glasses, listening. Near the windows, Lorraine had cornered two women in designer dresses, the kind whose jewelry could buy a house. Old Chicago society. The Brennan parents seem simple, Lorraine said. Very suburban. Middle-class values, but that makes them manageable. They'll be grateful. One woman leaned closer, and the daughter, the chef. Lorraine laughed. Juliet. She's harmless. Working-class types always want someone successful to lift them up. I placed smoked salmon on their plates. Lorraine accepted it without looking at me, too busy dismissing my existence to notice the target was standing beside her. The tray emptied. I headed toward the service station but detoured past my parents' table. Mom and Dad sat with longtime family friends. Dad saw me approach with the wine bottle, his face cycling through shock, anger, and understanding. He began to stand. I met his eyes and shook my head. I'm fine, I said softly, refilling his glass. Mom's hand hovered near my arm. You don't have to. This is where I need to be. Something shifted. They'd suspected for a while that I wasn't just a struggling chef. They simply hadn't wanted to know. Mom leaned back, eyes clearer. Dad nodded once. I moved on to the main table where Claire sat with Griffin and their wedding party. Champagne, flowers, laughter. Claire looked perfect, confident, composed, successful. She didn't look at me. Her jaw was tight. She was mortified that her sister was serving. But Griffin looked up. Really looked. I'm sorry, he mouthed. I nodded. It was the first sincere moment I'd seen from anyone connected to the Hayes family. Maybe there was hope for him. As I reached for an empty basket, Griffin's phone buzzed. He checked it, his face drained of color. Griffin, Claire asked. He showed her the screen. Her hand flew to her mouth. The ring, she whispered. What do you mean? Connor thinks it might be stolen, Griffin said urgently. He saw it earlier, checked online. It matches a police report. Jewelry store robbery, 3 months ago. Claire stared at the diamond on her finger. I leaned in, pretending to adjust glassware. The setting, the prongs, the detailing along the band. Recognition slammed into me. No, that custom setting belonged to Brennan and Laurent Fine Jewelry. My store. Naomi and I had made 3 rings like that. One had been stolen 3 months earlier in a break-in that caused over $40,000 in damage. The Hayes family had given my sister a stolen engagement ring. A ring stolen from me. 8:45 p.m. Griffin and Claire disappeared toward the restrooms for a private discussion about the ring. I slipped into the business center with my phone heart pounding. Please don't be what I think it is. Bellini's had a small business center tucked off the main hallway, just a desk, a printer, and blessed privacy. I locked the door and pulled up the cloud files for Brennan and Laurent Fine Jewelry. Search theft, September 2021. The file loaded immediately. Item Cartier engagement ring. Asher cut diamond 2.0 carats platinum setting. Serial number BL2847. Date of theft, September 15th, 2021. Time 3:47 p.m. Security camera notes suspect identified as white male approximately 50 years old caught on camera. Face partially visible. Insurance claim filed $42,000. I opened the photo documentation, zoomed in on the setting details, the platinum prongs, the filigree work along the band. Then I compared it to the blurry shot I'd taken earlier at the main table. Same setting, same proportions, same custom details. It was our ring. Victor Hayes had stolen it from our store 3 months ago, and now it was on my sister's finger. I needed to see it up close to confirm the serial number. I found Griffin and Claire near the coat check, tucked into a corner, arguing in urgent whispers. Connor's a gemologist. Claire. Griffin was saying, his voice strained. He knows what he's talking about. That ring matches the description of one that was stolen. Your parents told me it was a family heirloom. Claire's voice broke slightly. Not angry, scared. We don't have heirlooms. Griffin's voice was flat. My family isn't wealthy like they pretend to be. We don't have generations of jewelry sitting around. Then they bought it. They have a receipt. Do they? Griffin challenged. Have you actually seen a receipt? I stepped forward with my tray. More water. Claire waved me away without looking, and I got what I needed. Up close, I could see every detail. The Asher cut with its step facets, the platinum setting with our signature filigree, and the tiny BL mark on the interior that Naomi insisted we put on all our custom pieces. Brennan and Laurent. I stepped back, made brief eye contact with Griffin. He looked lost, like the ground was shifting under his feet. I made a decision, probably rash, definitely risky. As I turned away, I leaned in slightly, my voice barely a whisper. September 15th, 3:47 p.m. Ask them where they were. Griffin's head snapped up. How did you? Just ask, I said quietly and kept walking. Behind me, I heard Griffin call out, Mom, Dad, can you come here for a second? I moved to the bar, positioning myself where I could see but not be obviously watching. Victor and Lorraine made their way over, both wearing concerned parental expressions. What is it, son? Victor's voice was hearty, confident. Griffin squared his shoulders. Dad, September 15th. Where were you at 3:47 in the afternoon? For half a second, Victor's face went completely blank. Not confused, blank. Like someone had wiped all expression away and he was scrambling to reload the right one. Then he recovered. Why would I remember a random date? It's not random, Griffin said, steel in his voice. September 15th, 3:47 p.m. Where were you? Lorraine stepped in smoothly. Griffin, sweetheart, why are you asking such a bizarrely specific question? The ring, Griffin said flatly. Claire's ring. Where did you really get it? Victor's expression shifted to wounded innocence. I told you, from a reputable dealer in... The restaurant's entrance opened, and Naomi Laurent walked in. My business partner looked exactly like what she was. Successful, powerful, dangerous. Her suit was Armani, her heels, Louboutin, her posture, radiating ownership. At 38, Naomi had built Brennan and Laurent into one of the most respected jewelry stores in the Midwest. She was brilliant with design, ruthless with business, and fiercely protective of what was ours. She saw me immediately, probably because I was the only person wearing a server's apron and standing still. Her eyes widened in surprise. Then her gaze tracked across the room and landed on Claire's left hand. Even from 30 feet away, Naomi recognized the ring. I watched her face change. Surprise shifted to recognition, to shock, to cold, hard anger. Her jaw set in that way I'd seen 100 times before, usually right before she destroyed someone in negotiation. Our eyes met across the crowded restaurant. Her expression asked a clear question, "Is that the ring?" I nodded once. Naomi's hand tightened on her purse. She started walking toward the main table, her stride purposeful and dangerous. I pulled out my phone, typed fast, police arrive in 20 minutes. I called them earlier. Let this play out, need them to fully incriminate themselves. Naomi checked her phone mid-stride, paused. Then she adjusted her course, heading toward me. Instead, her face settling into neutral professionalism. We met near the bar, two women having a quiet conversation. The Cartier. Naomi's voice was barely audible. The one Victor Hayes stole from our store 3 months ago. That's the one, I confirmed. And you're letting your sister wear stolen goods. I only found out 10 minutes ago. I glanced at my watch. But now we have them. Theft, fraud, conspiracy, identity. Theft, it's all converging. Naomi's eyes gleamed. What's the plan? Victor's about to make a toast, I said quietly. He's going to announce the lawsuit against Stella Brennan. Talk about protecting his family's legacy, fighting for justice. Perform righteous indignation for everyone here. And we let him dig that hole as deep as he possibly can. Let him put every lie on record in front of 100 witnesses. Naomi smiled coldly, and then I reached up and untied the server's apron, let it drop onto the bar. Underneath my black pants and cashmere sweater were rumpled but serviceable. I wasn't pretending to be staff anymore. Then we bury him in that hole. 9:15 p.m. Victor Hayes clinked a fork against his champagne glass, and the entire room fell silent. I stood near the rear exit, Naomi in the opposite corner. We had him surrounded, and he didn't even know it. Victor had arranged for a microphone, of course he had. This was a performance he'd been planning, a stage he'd set with precision. The lighting hit him from below, casting theatrical shadows across his face as he stood at the center of the room, commanding attention the way he'd probably commanded it his entire life. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends. Victor's voice boomed through the sound system, warm and confident. Tonight, we're not just celebrating love. We're celebrating the union of two wonderful families. The guests smiled, champagne glasses raised halfway in anticipation of a toast. The Hayes family has always represented tradition, quality, and integrity in the restaurant business. Victor continued, his hand over his heart in a gesture of sincerity that would have been touching if I didn't know it was complete fiction. For generations, we've carried forward the culinary heritage passed down from my grandfather, who came to this country from Sicily with nothing but his recipes and his dreams. A few guests murmured appreciatively, the American dream narrative perfectly executed, except Victor's grandfather had owned a hardware store in Akron, Ohio, never set foot in Sicily in his life. Those recipes, osso buco risotto, Milanese tiramisu, were crafted with love perfected over decades and guarded as the treasure they are. Victor's voice grew heavier, sadder, which is why it pains me deeply to announce that we've been forced to defend our family's honor in a court of law. He paused, letting the dramatic weight of that statement settle over the room. Claire's face went pale. She clearly hadn't known her engagement party was going to double as a press conference for her future in-laws lawsuit. Griffin shifted uncomfortably beside her, his jaw tight. "We are suing a so-called chef," Victor continued, his voice hardening with righteous anger. "A woman named Stella Brennan for the theft of our family's intellectual property. She has stolen our recipes, our techniques, our legacy, and built a fortune on what she took from us." The room erupted in murmurs. Heads turned whispers, spreading like wildfire. I stayed perfectly still, watching Victor perform. "Our recipes," he said again, his voice breaking slightly with manufactured emotion. "The osso buco my grandfather taught my father. The risotto my mother made every Sunday. The tiramisu we served at every family celebration. All of it stolen, repackaged, sold for profit while we..." He gestured to himself and Lorraine standing beside him with tears glistening in her eyes. "While we lost everything, had to close our restaurants, watched our dreams crumble. Some guests looked genuinely sympathetic now. Others seemed skeptical, glancing around as if trying to figure out if this was appropriate dinner conversation. We're not wealthy people," Victor said, his voice trembling. "We're simple folks who worked hard, who tried to build something honest. And now we're watching someone else exploit what we built, what we lost, what was stolen from us. The performance was masterful. I had to give him that. If I didn't know better, I might have believed him myself." "We're seeking $50 million in damages," Victor said flatly. "Not because we want the money, because we want justice, because our family's legacy deserves to be protected, because thieves should not profit from their crimes." He raised his glass. "So tonight, as we celebrate Griffin and Claire's future together, I ask you all to remember that some things, family integrity, truth, are worth fighting for." Glasses clinked. Guests applauded, some enthusiastically, others uncertainly. I waited. Let the applause die down. Let Victor bask in his moment of perceived victory. Then I raised my hand, polite and patient, like a student waiting to be called on. Victor saw me and smiled magnanimously, not recognizing the threat. Yes, a question from the audience. Of course, though I don't believe we've been formally introduced. We'll get to that, I said pleasantly. You mentioned osso buco. I'm curious, can you describe your grandfather's specific technique for preparing it? Victor blinked clearly, not expecting a cooking question. Well, it's traditional Milanese braised veal shank, braised in... Which cut of the shank? I interrupted gently. How is it tied? What temperature do you braise at? What are the components of the braising liquid? Victor's smile faltered. Well, obviously the hind shank, braised in wine and... What kind of wine? I pressed. At what temperature? For how long? Victor's face was starting to redden. Are you seriously interrogating me about cooking techniques at my son's engagement party? Just curious, I said, my voice still pleasant, because authentic Milanese osso buco uses the hind shank cut crosswise to expose the marrow bone in, tied with butcher's twine, in a figure-8 pattern to hold its shape during the long braise. It's cooked at exactly 285 degrees Fahrenheit in reduced Barolo wine with saffron threads, gremolata made fresh at service, and a specific ratio of aromatics onion, celery, carrot. Garlic that has to be precisely balanced or the dish fails. The room had gone completely silent. Every eye in the place was on me now. Victor forced a laugh. Well, you've obviously watched some cooking shows. Good for you. Or, I said quietly, perhaps I know these recipes intimately. Perhaps I know them because they're not from your grandfather at all. I stepped forward out of the shadows near the exit into the better light of the main room. Naomi stayed where she was, but I felt her attention focused on me like a laser. They're from my grandmother, I said clearly, my voice carrying without the microphone. Bianca Conti. She owned Nonna's Table in Little Italy, New York from 1982 to 1987. A small restaurant that earned a Michelin star within 2 years of opening. A place where every recipe was her own creation, documented in her personal notebooks. Victor's face was brick red now. I've never heard of... Where you Victor Hayes worked for exactly 3 months as a prep cook in 1987. I continued. Before my grandmother fired you for repeatedly showing up drunk, stealing from the register, and most relevantly for taking photographs of her recipe notebooks when you thought no one was looking. The room exploded in murmurs. Guests turned to each other, whispering frantically. That's slander, Victor shouted. I have never... Actually, a voice said from the middle of the room, it's true. My father stood up, his face serious. Every head swiveled toward him. I was a delivery driver back then, Dad said quietly. Worked for a food distribution company that serviced restaurants in Little Italy. That's where I met Eleanor. She was waitressing at Nonna's Table to put herself through college. We both remember when Bianca fired a guy named Vic. We remember because he made a scene, threatened her, said she'd regret it. Mom stood beside him, her voice soft but clear. And 3 months after that, Nonna's Table burned down, arson, the fire marshal said. They never found who did it. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Every single eye in that room turned to Victor Hayes. His face had gone from red to gray, his hands trembling on the microphone. The room erupted into chaos. Phones came out. People started Googling Bianca Conti, Nonna's Table, then 1987 fire. But I wasn't done, not even close. This is lies. Victor's voice cut through the murmurs, loud and desperate. Complete fabrication. I have never heard of Bianca Conti. I've never worked in New York. This is a coordinated attack on my family's reputation. I pulled out my phone, calm and deliberate. Really? Then you won't mind if I share some documentation? I walked toward the AV control panel built into the wall near the bar. Bellini's had a state-of-the-art system I knew because I'd reviewed the specs when my holding company acquired a 15% stake in the restaurant 6 months ago. Jasper Monroe had needed capital and I'd needed intelligence on my competitors. It took me 30 seconds to connect my phone to the system. The screens mounted around the room, the ones that had been cycling through photos of Claire and Griffin all evening, went dark for a moment, then lit up with the first image from my files. Employment record, Nana's Table, Brooklyn, NY. Name Victor Hayes. Position prep cook. Dates, March 15, 1987, June 8, 1987. Signed, Juliana Moretti, owner. Juliana Moretti was my grandmother's legal name, I said clearly. She changed it to Bianca Conti when she opened the restaurant, but the employment records still show her birth name. The room had gone completely silent again, everyone's attention riveted on the screens. I swiped to the next image. Termination letter. Date, June 8, 1987. To Victor Hayes. Reason for termination: theft of proprietary recipes and techniques, repeated health code violations, insubordination, creating hostile work environment. This termination is immediate and without severance. Signed, Bianca Conti, owner, executive chef. Another swipe. Health Department inspection report. Nana's Table. Date, June 3, 1987. Violations cited. Cross-contamination of raw and cooked foods. Prep cook V. Hayes responsible. Improper food storage temperatures. Prep cook V. Hayes responsible. Failure to follow hand-washing protocols. Prep cook V. Hayes responsible. Corrective action employee V. Hayes removed from food handling duties pending termination. Victor's face had gone from red to white. Those are forgeries. Anyone can create fake documents. Can anyone fake this? I swiped again. The screens filled with a scanned newspaper article yellowed with age, but perfectly readable. Little Italy restaurant destroyed in suspicious fire. September 18, 1987. Nana's Table, a rising star in Brooklyn's Little Italy neighborhood, was completely destroyed in a fire early Thursday morning. Owner and chef Bianca Conti was not on premises at the time. Fire marshal suspects arson. Investigation ongoing. Restaurant had recently gained acclaim for its authentic Northern Italian cuisine. My mother stood up, her voice shaking. After Victor left, Bianca started having problems. Someone broke into the restaurant twice. Nothing stolen, but her office was ransacked both times. She told me someone was looking for something. And then her voice broke. 3 months later, the fire. Everything she'd built gone. Claire was on her feet now, her face pale, her hands trembling. She looked at our parents with something close to betrayal in her eyes. You knew about this lawsuit. Her voice cracked. You knew Victor's family was suing someone named Stella Brennan, and you didn't tell me. Sweetheart, Mom started. You let me plan a wedding. Claire's voice rose. You let me fall in love with Griffin. You came to parties and smiled and made small talk, and the whole time you knew his family was suing our family. Dad stepped forward. We didn't know for sure that Stella was who? Claire spun toward me, and I saw tears streaking her makeup. And you? How do you have all this? How do you know so much about Stella Brennan? How did you get employment records and health department files? And she stopped, her eyes widening as pieces started falling into place. How do you know this much unless you... I took a deep breath. This was it. The secret I'd kept for a decade, the double life I'd maintained through sheer determination and careful planning. Because Claire, I said quietly, I am Stella Brennan. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a breath. Not a whisper. Just shocked. Complete silence. Then everyone started talking at once. That's impossible. Claire's voice cut through the chaos. You're a broke-line cook. You work at some dive restaurant. You can't even afford to pay rent. You live in a studio apartment. You drive a 10-year-old car. Actually. Naomi's voice rang out clear and professional as she stepped forward from her corner. Juliet owns 23 restaurants across 7 states. She holds 7 Michelin stars. She's a James Beard Award winner. Her estimated net worth is approximately $180 million. The room erupted again. Phones came out everywhere. I watched guests frantically typing into Google their faces, illuminated by screen glow. Stella Brennan chef. Stella Brennan restaurants. Stella Brennan net worth. I could see the results loading on their screens. Photos of me in chef's whites, my face often turned away from the camera, or partially obscured. I'd always been careful about publicity. But there were some clear shots, award ceremonies, industry events, magazine covers. I swiped through my own phone, projecting more evidence onto the screens. Business license, Stella Brennan DBA, Juliette Brennan. Hospitality LLC. Tax returns showing restaurant income $47.2 million 2020. The Culinary Institute of America. Graduation photo 2009. Juliette Brennan, valedictorian. Le Cordon Bleu Paris, Diplomat. Awarded to Juliette Brennan, professional name Stella Brennan. James Beard Foundation. Awards 2019. Winner Best Chef, Northeast Region. Stella Brennan, Harvest Moon. The photo showed me clearly, no obscuring angles, no turned-away face. Me in a black dress, holding the trophy, smiling at the camera. Victor was backing away from the microphone, his hands up in a defensive gesture. She's lying. This is all fabricated. Both of them. It's a conspiracy to ruin my family. But no one was listening to him anymore. Every eye in the room was on me, on the screens on their phones, as they pulled up article after article. Stella Brennan's Harvest Moon earns 3rd Michelin star. The reclusive chef, why Stella Brennan shuns the spotlight. Brennan Empire expands 5 new locations announced. Claire sank back into her chair, her hand over her mouth. When she looked up at me, her eyes were swimming with tears. Why, her voice was barely a whisper. Why would you hide this from us, from me? The question hung in the air, and for the first time all night I felt the weight of what I'd done. Not the deception of Victor Hayes, not the strategic planning, but the distance I'd kept from my own family. Because you made it clear you were ashamed of my career choice, I said quietly. The room was silent enough that everyone heard me. Because every family dinner became a session where you tried to fix my life, where you suggested I get a real job, where you talked about Claire's success in marketing like it was something admirable and my cooking like it was something I'd grow out of. Mom started to speak, but I held up a hand. I'm not blaming you, I continued. I'm explaining. Building an empire under a different name was easier than constantly defending my choices to people who'd already decided I'd failed. It was easier to let you think I was broke and struggling than to watch you try to figure out how your disappointing daughter accidentally became successful. The silence that descended this time was different, heavier, weighted with years of assumptions and misunderstandings. Claire opened her mouth to respond, and that's when the kitchen doors burst open. Jasper Monroe appeared, his face flushed and anxious. His eyes found Victor immediately. Victor, he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. We need to talk, now. There's a situation with tonight's dinner service. Every head in the room turned. My eyes narrowed. Here it comes, I thought. Santiago's about to be exposed. Jasper Monroe looked like a man who'd just realized he'd bet on the wrong horse in a fixed race. And behind him, through the kitchen door's glass window, I could see Santiago anxiously watching. Every eye in the room had turned to Jasper when he'd mentioned a situation with the dinner service. The tension was palpable. Confusion mixed with the lingering shock of my identity revealed everyone trying to process too much information at once. Lorraine's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp as a blade. What situation? Jasper turned toward Victor, clearly intending to have a private conversation. But he forgot about the microphone. Or maybe he didn't realize how sensitive the sound system was. The plan didn't work. Jasper said, his voice carrying clearly through the speakers. I don't know how, but the prep got swapped somehow. The food they're serving is completely fine. The room went dead silent. Claire stood slowly, her face pale. What plan? Jasper's eyes went wide as he realized his mistake, that his words had been broadcast to 100 people. His face drained of color. Victor jumped in, trying to salvage the situation. He's confused. He's not confused, I said clearly. He's talking about the plan to give everyone at this party mild food poisoning and then blame it on Stella Brennan's influence on Chicago cuisine. Destroy my reputation by making it look like my cooking techniques caused a mass illness. The gasps were audible. Guests looked down at their plates with sudden alarm. A few pushed their dishes away from them like the food might bite. Jasper held up his hands. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled up the next set of images on my phone, projecting them onto the screens. Photo 1, Santiago Rivera on phone in walk-in freezer. Timestamp 7:52 p.m. Photo 2, Santiago Rivera adding substance to large sauce pot. Timestamp 8:03 p.m. Then I displayed the screenshot I'd taken when I'd briefly gotten signal outside the walk-in. When I'd managed to access the restaurant's server through the admin back door, I discovered when reviewing their systems 6 months ago. Text message thread, Jasper Monroe, Santiago Rivera. I read them aloud, my voice steady and clear. Jasper, is the Brennan family batch ready? Santiago, contaminated and labeled VIP. What, they'll get sick within 2 hours. Jasper, not too severe, just enough to make headlines. Santiago, trust me, Stella Brennan's reputation will be destroyed by morning. The room erupted in outrage. Voices rose, chairs scraped. Someone shouted about calling the police. Jasper was backing toward the kitchen, hands up defensively. Those are private messages. You can't. I photographed them when I was locked in your walk-in freezer, I said calmly, after Santiago trapped me there, which by the way is also a crime. False imprisonment, assault, possibly attempted murder, depending on how the prosecutor wants to charge it. The kitchen doors burst open and Santiago was pushed through by several of Bellini's other kitchen staff. His chef's coat was askew, his face flushed with anger and fear. The other cooks, the ones who'd heard everything through the kitchen speakers, looked at him with disgust and fury. He stood just inside the dining room, defiant but clearly scared. Want to explain yourself, Santiago? I asked. His jaw clenched. Then the words came spilling out, years of resentment finally finding voice. You destroyed my career. His voice cracked with emotion. I worked under you for 2 years. 2 years of 16-hour days of perfecting every technique you taught me, of creating dishes that won awards. And what did I get? Chef Stella's talented protege. That's all anyone ever called me. I was never Santiago Rivera, promising young chef, always just another person in your shadow. So you decided to poison my sister's engagement party. My voice was cold. That was your solution, revenge by food poisoning. It wasn't going to be that bad. Santiago looked desperate now, like he was trying to convince himself as much as us. Just stomach issues, nothing serious. Jasper said if we could destroy your reputation, if we could make people afraid of your cooking, then I could finally step out from under your shadow, finally build my own name. Griffin was on his feet, his face red with anger. You were going to make people sick. You were going to poison guests at my engagement party to settle some professional grudge. The screens flickered again. I'd set the security footage to play on a loop. There it was, clear as day, Santiago locking me in the walk-in freezer. The timestamp read 8:01 p.m. The angle showed, his face clearly showed him testing the door to make sure it was sealed, showed him walking away. Guests were standing now, some moving toward the exits. The murmurs had turned to frightened conversations. A few people had their phones out, clearly calling the police, or texting loved ones, or documenting everything on social media. Naomi moved smoothly to block the main entrance, her presence commanding enough that people actually stopped. I'd advise everyone to stay, she said, her voice carrying authority. The police are already on their way. They should be here within 5 minutes. They'll want witness statements from everyone who was present. Victor was backing up now, his confident facade finally cracking. But then something shifted in his expression, a last-ditch calculation, a desperate gamble. This is all a distraction, his voice boomed through the microphone. Yes, maybe Jasper and Santiago made poor choices, but that doesn't change the fundamental truth that Stella Brennan, whoever she claims to be, stole our family's recipes. He pulled a stack of folders from a bag that Lorraine handed him. With surprising technical skill, he grabbed the AV controller from the bar and connected his own phone to the system. I have proof, Victor said, his voice taking on a prosecutorial edge. Proof that Stella Brennan is an Italian con artist, not this American woman claiming to be her. The screens filled with what looked like official Italian government documents. Birth certificate, Republic of Italy. Name Stella Maria Brennan. Born Milan, Italy, February 14th, 1987. Parents Marco Brennan and Giuliana Moretti. More documents flashed on screen immigration records showing Estella Brennan entering the United States in 2005. Italian restaurant licenses for establishments in Milan and Rome bearing the name Stella Brennan. Educational records from culinary schools in Italy. They looked real, disturbingly real. Embossed seals, official letterheads, signatures and stamps that seemed authentic. The murmuring started again, this time with a different tone. Confusion, doubt. Maybe Victor was right. Maybe Juliet was an imposter. Maybe this was all an elaborate con. Claire sank back into her chair, her hand over her mouth. She looked at me with eyes that held more questions than answers. Victor smiled triumphantly. These are authenticated documents from the Italian government, obtained through official channels. They prove that the real Stella Brennan is Italian, not American, that she immigrated here 20 years ago, that this woman, he pointed at me, is an imposter who stole not just our recipes, but another person's entire identity. Some guests were nodding. The documents looked official enough, professional enough. And after the chaos of the last hour, maybe this narrative made more sense. Maybe the broke sister really was broke and all of this was just an elaborate hoax. I looked at Naomi. She met my eyes and gave the smallest nod. I stepped forward and despite everything that had happened, the room fell silent. Waiting. By all means, Victor, I said, my smile cold and sharp. Let's talk about document forgery. While the guests were still processing the poisoning conspiracy, Victor had played his trump card forged documents so perfect they could fool most people. Too bad for him I'd spent 3 months having my lawyers verify every piece of paper in my life. I walked slowly toward the screens displaying Victor's documents, studying them with the calm attention of someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. Impressive forgeries! I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. Professional quality. Must have cost you a fortune. How much did you pay? Victor's face flushed. These are official documents from the Italian government. Official documents have specific security features, I said, pulling out my phone. Watermarks that are only visible under UV light. Embossed seals with unique patterns that are registered with the issuing agencies. Registration numbers that can be verified online through government databases. I accessed the Italian Ministry of Interior's Vital Records Verification portal, the one I'd bookmarked 3 months ago when I first learned about Victor's lawsuit. Entered the registration number from the birth certificate displayed on screen. The result loaded immediately. Nessun record trovato. No record found. Technical glitch, Victor said quickly. Italian bureaucracy is notoriously slow. Their systems are always down. I zoomed in on the seal at the bottom of the birth certificate, projecting the close-up onto all the screens. This embossed seal, it's printed. Flat ink trying to look dimensional. Real embossing creates an actual physical change in the paper. You can feel it with your fingers, see the depth when light hits it at an angle. This is just clever printing. I turned my phone's flashlight on and held it behind one of the projected documents. The paper, or rather the image of the paper, showed no change in opacity, no shadow patterns. No watermark, I said. Real Italian vital records have a watermark of the Italian flag that's visible when backlit. This has nothing. I moved systematically through each document Victor had presented. The birth certificate uses a template that's literally available online if you Google Italian birth certificate blank form. You can download it for €12. The immigration papers are in the wrong format for 1987. This format wasn't introduced until 1994 after Italy joined the Schengen Agreement. And these restaurant licenses, I laughed short and cold. Italian restaurant licensing didn't exist in this format until 2010, when they restructured their health department regulations. Victor was backing up now, his confident facade crumbling. Then how do you explain being Stella Brennan if you're just a broke-line cook who can barely pay rent? Easy, I said, by showing you real documents. I pulled up my own files, the ones I'd had notarized, verified, and cross-referenced by 3 separate law firms over the past 3 months. Business license, State of Illinois. Stella Brennan, DBA Juliet Brennan Hospitality, LLC. Registered 2014. Birth certificate, Cook County, Illinois. Name Juliet Stella Brennan. Born February 14, 1987. Parents Paul Brennan and Eleanor Brennan. Professional name application, State of Illinois. Juliet Brennan requests authorization to conduct business under professional name Stella Brennan. Reason middle name Stella honors grandmother Bianca, Stella Conti. Approved 2014. Then the photos, not doctored images, but real photographs spanning a decade. Culinary Institute of America, 2009. A class photo showing a younger version of me in chef's whites, my name tag clearly visible, Juliet Stella Brennan. Le Cordon Bleu Paris, 2011, my diploma mounted and photographed in high resolution, both names listed clearly. The grand opening of my first restaurant, 2014, a local newspaper article, the text zoomed in and readable. Chef Stella Brennan, whose birth name is Juliet, credits her grandmother, Bianca Conti, for inspiring both her career and her professional name. And finally, the James Beard Award ceremony from 2019. Not a photo, but a video clip. Me on stage in that black dress holding the trophy, my voice clear as I gave my acceptance speech. I want to thank my family who've always known me as Juliet, and my grandmother Bianca Conti, who's no longer with us but whose spirit lives in every dish I create. She gave me my middle name, Stella, and she gave me my love of cooking. This award is for her. The room was completely silent. Guests were staring at the screens at me at their phones as they frantically searched for the video online and found it posted on the James Beard Foundation's official YouTube channel, viewed over 2 million times. Griffin stood slowly, his face pale in the dim lighting. When he spoke, his voice was steady but dangerous. "Dad, tell me the truth. Did you steal from her grandmother?" Victor looked at his son, and I saw something crack in his expression. "Son, you don't understand how the business works. Sometimes you have to, yes or no." Griffin's voice cut through the room like a whip. Silence stretched between them, long, painful. "They were just recipes," Victor said finally, his voice smaller. "Recipes can't be owned. Italian food is Italian food. Anyone can make osso buco. That's not what I asked," Griffin said, and his voice was shaking now. "Did you steal Bianca Conti's recipe notebook? Did you take it from her restaurant?" Victor seemed to shrink. I borrowed them. To study, to learn from. She overreacted when she found out. It was just research. She had no right to fire me over... Her restaurant burned down 3 months after you left. My mother said, her voice hard. "Bianca told me strange things started happening after you were fired. Someone broke in twice. Her office was ransacked. And then the fire. Arson, the fire marshal said. They never found who did it. I had nothing to do with that." Victor's voice rose in panic. "I was in Chicago by then. I had nothing... What about our restaurants?" Griffin's voice was deadly quiet now. "Hayes Tavern, Victor's American Table, the Hayes House. What really happened to them, Dad? The economy was tough. Timing was bad. We had some challenges. What about the health code violations? The bankruptcy filings? The repeating patterns? Let me help with that," I said, pulling up one final set of documents. Public records this time. The kind anyone could access if they knew where to look and had enough patience to dig. Hayes Tavern, Chicago, 2003. Health Department violations, cross-contamination, improper storage. Menu analysis dishes match those of Enzo's Italian Kitchen, closed 2002. Bankruptcy filed 2004. Victor's American Table, Naperville, 2008. Health Department violations, temperature violations, expired ingredients. Menu analysis dishes match those of Carlotta's, closed 2007. Bankruptcy filed 2007. The Hayes House, Evanston, 2015. Health Department violations, multiple critical violations. Menu analysis dishes match recipes from 3 different closed restaurants. Bankruptcy filed 2016. The pattern was crystal clear. Victor had spent his entire career stealing recipes from restaurants that had recently closed, opening his own establishments, and then failing spectacularly due to his own incompetence. The same health code violations, the same lack of fundamental kitchen skills, the same trajectory from promising opening to disaster. Griffin sank into his chair, his hands covering his face. When he looked up, his eyes were red. "You've been stealing from everyone," he whispered. "Our entire lives, everything you built, everything you told me about family legacy and tradition and honor, it was all stolen. We needed the money," Victor's voice cracked, "for the family, for you to give you opportunities to send you to good schools. Everything I did for you." Griffin's laugh was bitter and broken. "What family, Dad? You and Mom aren't even together anymore." The gasps rippled through the room. All eyes turned to Lorraine, whose face had gone white. "You've been separated for what, 2 years?" Griffin continued, his voice raw. "Living in different wings of the house, sleeping in separate bedrooms, pretending at family dinners and social events, pretending for me. What else have you been lying about?" Griffin asked about the lies. I opened the financial records I'd subpoenaed 2 weeks ago, and his face went from anger to devastation in under 30 seconds. He demanded the full truth. I had it ready. But knowing he needed to see it and watching him actually process it were two very different things. "Griffin," I said gently, "are you sure you want to see this in front of everyone like this?" His jaw set. "I need to know everything, right now." I nodded and pulled up the first document, projecting it onto the screens that had already shown so much tonight. Hayes Family Tax Returns, 2011 through 2021. Average annual household income, $28,374. The number hung there on the screen. $28,000 a year. That was poverty level for a family of 3 in Chicago, below the threshold for federal assistance programs. I watched guests do the math in their heads, their eyes moving from the screen to Lorraine Hayes' jewelry. The pearls alone were probably worth $40,000. The diamond tennis bracelet, another $30,000. The designer suit she was wearing tonight cost more than most people's monthly rent. How is that possible? Griffin's voice was barely a whisper. "Because of your credit cards," I said quietly. I pulled up his credit report, the one I'd obtained through legal channels 2 weeks ago after my lawyers filed the motion claiming identity theft as part of our countersuit. Credit report Griffin Hayes. Nordstrom card. Balance, $35,247. American Express Platinum. Balance, $48,903. Chase Sapphire Reserve. Balance, $52. We so $41. Discover card, balance $23,156. Capital One Venture, balance $18,782. Macy's credit card, balance $15,330. Bloomingdale's card, balance $9,654. Total outstanding debt, $203,513. Griffin's hands were shaking. I didn't open these cards. I only have 2 credit cards, one personal one for work expenses. He read through the list again, his voice getting quieter with each item. I don't shop at Nordstrom. I've never had an American Express Platinum card. I don't even know what half of these are. His eyes found his mother across the room, took in the designer clothes, the jewelry that sparkled under the lights, the handbag that cost more than his monthly rent. "Your jewelry," he said, his voice hollow, "your clothes." Lorraine's face crumpled. Tears started streaming down her face, and for the first time tonight, I almost believed they were real. "Griffin, sweetheart, we were going to pay you back. Once things settled down, once we got back on our feet, pay me back with what?" Griffin's voice was rising now. "You make $30,000 a year, Mom. How are you going to pay back $200,000? Victor jumped in, desperate. "After the lawsuit, once we win the $50 million from Stella Brennan, we'll pay everything back with interest. We'll die." The lawsuit you filed against my fiance's sister, Griffin, looked like he might be sick. "That was your plan, Sue Claire's family, to pay back the money you stole from me." I pulled up the next set of documents. Bank statements from Griffin's checking account obtained the same way. Legal, documented, undeniable. "There's more," I said quietly. The statements showed a pattern. Regular transfers, $2,000 here, $5,000 there. Sometimes $3,000. Month after month, year after year, money moving from Griffin's checking account into accounts registered to Victor and Lorraine Hayes. "You've been transferring money directly from my account," Griffin's voice cracked. "Without my permission." "For 6 years," I confirmed. "Total amount transferred approximately $180,000. Griffin collapsed into his chair. Not sat down, collapsed, like his legs just stopped working. "I kept wondering why I never had any savings," he said almost to himself. "I make good money. I live modestly. I don't go on expensive vacations or buy things I don't need. But I could never save enough for a down payment on a house. I thought—" His laugh was bitter. "I thought I was just terrible with money." "You're not terrible," I said, and I meant it. "Your money was stolen." I pulled up the next images. Signature comparison sheets that my forensic document examiner had prepared. On one side, Griffin's actual signature taken from his driver's license, his work ID documents he'd personally signed. On the other side, the signatures on the credit card applications. They were close, very close, but not identical. The loop on the G was slightly different. The pressure on certain letters wasn't quite right. To a casual observer, they'd look the same. To an expert, they were clearly forgeries. "Your father practiced forging your signature," I said. "I found the evidence in my private investigator's files." The next image showed pages from a notebook, lined paper filled with Griffin's name written over and over and over again. Griffin Hayes in slightly different styles, slightly different pressures, experimenting until the forgery was perfect. Hundreds of times, maybe thousands. "How long—" Griffin turned to his father and his voice was deadly quiet. "How long have you been forging my signature?" Victor's mouth opened and closed. Since your first job, we needed—" "I gave you money." Griffin's voice exploded through the room. "Voluntarily, $2,000 a month for 6 years. That's $144,000 that I sent you willingly because you told me you were struggling. Because you said you needed help." That wasn't enough. Lorraine's voice was desperate, defensive. "Griffin, do you have any idea how expensive it is to maintain our lifestyle? The country club membership alone is—" "Your lifestyle." Griffin stood slowly, tears streaming down his face. "Your lifestyle." His voice broke. "I worked 80-hour weeks. I haven't taken a real vacation in 4 years. I live in a 600-square-foot apartment so I could send you money every month. I ate ramen for dinner half the time to save on groceries. And you were stealing from me the entire time to pay for country club memberships and designer clothes." Claire moved toward him, her hand reaching for his arm. Griffin let her touch him, but didn't look away from his parents. "I loved you," he said, and his voice was wrecked. "I trusted you completely. When people at work said you were difficult or demanding, I defended you. When my friends said you seemed too concerned with appearances, I told them you were just prideful, just from a different generation. I made excuses for everything." He turned to me, his face red and wet with tears. "What else?" His voice was hoarse. "Just tell me everything. I need to know it all." I nodded slowly. "The engagement ring, the one Claire's wearing right now." Griffin closed his eyes. "Also stolen from my jewelry store 3 months ago. It was part of a break-in that took 17 pieces total. Insurance claim was $42,000. In the distance, barely audible at first, police sirens began to wail, growing louder, getting closer. Victor's head jerked toward the door, his face going white. "You called the police?" 40 minutes ago. I confirmed. "They'll be here any moment." Naomi had been waiting for her moment with the patience of a jeweler examining a diamond under light. When she pulled out her phone, I knew the Hayes family was about to shatter. The sirens were loud now, close enough that you could hear individual wails rising and falling. But the police hadn't entered yet. We had maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3. Naomi stepped forward, moving to the center of the room with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly what you were about to reveal. Every eye turned to her. "Before the police arrive," she said, her voice carrying that perfect professional tone she used with difficult clients, "let's address the engagement ring." Claire's hand moved instinctively to cover her left hand as if she could hide what everyone already knew was there. That ring, Naomi continued, is a Cartier engagement ring. Asher-cut diamond 2 carats platinum setting with signature Cartier detailing. Serial number BL2847. Griffin's voice was hoarse from crying. How do you know the serial number? Because it was stolen from my store, Naomi said flatly. Brennan and Laurent Fine Jewelry on Michigan Avenue, September 15th, 2021. She pulled up documents on her phone, projecting them onto the screens that had already shown so much tonight. Insurance claim. Brennan and Laurent. Fine Jewelry. Item Cartier engagement ring. Serial number BL2847. Value 40 temotusa or $1,000. Status stolen. Police report filed September 15, 2021, 4:15 p.m. Case number CPD 2021-09 or 782. The photo showed the ring in all its glory, photographed from multiple angles as part of our standard inventory documentation. The same ring that was currently on Claire's finger. Griffin turned slowly toward his parents. His face was beyond devastation now. It was the face of someone who'd discovered that everything they'd believed about their life was a carefully constructed lie. You told me you bought it, he said quietly. Then you told me it was a family heirloom. Then you said you bought it from a reputable dealer in New York. Which story was true? Victor was sweating visibly now, his face red and blotchy. I did buy it from a private seller. It was a cash transaction. So you have a receipt. Naomi's voice was sharp. A certificate of authenticity. A bill of sale. It was an informal transaction. Hand-to-hand sale. No paperwork. Victor's voice was getting higher, more desperate. How convenient, Naomi said coldly. Let me show everyone what really happened. She pulled up another file and the screens filled with security footage. Brennan and Laurent. Fine Jewelry. Interior camera 3. Date September 15, 2021. Time 3:47:12 p.m. The quality was excellent 4K resolution, perfect color, clear audio. We'd upgraded our security system the year before specifically because of an increase in jewelry thefts in the area. The footage showed the interior of our store, the elegant display cases, the soft lighting, the quiet luxury of a high-end jewelry boutique, and Victor Hayes walking through the front door. He was dressed casually, jeans, a button-down shirt, nothing that would draw attention. He looked like any other customer browsing for an engagement ring. Our staff member at the time, a young woman named Emily, greeted him with a professional smile. I want to look at engagement rings. Victor's voice came clearly through the audio. Cartier if you have them. Of course, sir, Emily said. Let me get our Cartier collection from the back. I'll be right with you. She walked toward the back room where we kept the more expensive pieces in a secured vault. The camera angle shifted. We had multiple cameras with overlapping coverage. This angle looked straight down at the front counter. Victor waited until Emily was out of sight. Then he looked around, checking the store, checking for witnesses. We only had one other customer that day, browsing in a corner, not paying attention. Victor leaned over the counter. His hand reached out quick and practiced. Grabbed a display box from the locked case that Emily had left momentarily open while retrieving keys for the vault. The box was clearly labeled. Even on the security footage, you could read it, Cartier, BL2847. Victor turned and ran toward the exit. Emily's voice came from the back room, confused at first, then alarmed. Sir. By the time she reached the front of the store, Victor was gone. The final frame froze on a perfect shot, Victor at the door looking back over his shoulder. His face was completely visible, clear, undeniable. Timestamp 3:47:33 p.m. The room was dead silent, not a breath, not a whisper. Naomi replayed the footage, slower this time. You could see every detail. The way Victor checked for witnesses, the deliberate reach across the counter, the grab, the run. It was unmistakable. Unambiguous. Victor Hayes caught on camera stealing a $42,000 engagement ring. Griffin stood slowly and walked to Claire. She was crying now, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't remove the ring herself. He did it for her. Gently. Carefully. The way you'd handle something precious that you'd just discovered was never really yours. He walked to Naomi and held out the ring. "This belongs to you," he said, his voice wrecked. "I am so sorry." Naomi took it with professional grace, examining it briefly under the light. "Thank you, Griffin. This isn't your fault." Griffin turned to his father. "You stole my fiancé's engagement ring. You made me propose to the woman I love with stolen goods. You let me put stolen property on her finger and promise her forever. I was going to pay them back." Victor's voice cracked with panic. "I just needed time. We couldn't afford a ring worthy of the Hayes name. I was going to make it right." "There is no Hayes name," Griffin's voice broke. "There's just a string of thefts and lies and fraud. That's all there ever was." Lorraine stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is entrapment. You set this up." She pointed at me and Naomi, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "You knew about the ring. You let the engagement happen. You let my son propose just so you could humiliate us in public." "No," I said coldly. "We let it happen to protect Griffin and Claire." The room went quiet again, waiting. "If we'd reported the theft the day after your husband stole it," I continued looking at Lorraine, "Griffin would have been investigated as a potential accomplice. The ring was in his possession. He'd presented it as a gift. He would have been questioned by police, possibly arrested. His credit would have been frozen during the investigation. His reputation at work would have been destroyed." I turned to Griffin. "I waited until I had proof that you were innocent, that you were a victim, not an accomplice, that you had no knowledge of where the ring came from." Griffin's voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you." The sirens were right outside now, not approaching anymore, arrived. Red and blue lights flashed through the restaurant's windows, painting the faces of everyone in the room with strobing color. Lorraine screamed at Victor, all composure gone. "Do something. Call our lawyer. Call someone." Victor looked at his wife, and for the first time all night, I saw something like acceptance in his face. The acceptance of someone who'd finally run out of moves. "We don't have a lawyer, Lorraine," he said quietly. "We can't afford one." Through the window, I could see 4 cars parked in front of the restaurant. They had no idea who was coming. If you're still listening, comment "I'm still here" right now. Please note what follows includes some fictionalized details. If you'd rather not continue, you can stop here and explore other content instead. 10:30 p.m. 2 Chicago police officers walked through Bellini's main entrance, followed by 2 FBI agents in dark suits. Agent Foster, the one in front, looked like she'd done this 1,000 times, because she had. The dining room split like water parting around a stone. Guests stumbled backward, champagne flutes abandoned on tables, phones rising instinctively to capture what was about to happen. Victor Hayes turned sharply toward the kitchen entrance, his eyes calculating the 30-foot sprint to the swinging doors and whatever slim chance of escape lay beyond them. He made it 2 steps before Bellini's security guard, the same kid who'd tried to turn me away at the door 4 hours ago, stepped directly into his path with the sudden confidence of someone who'd been given very clear instructions. Victor froze, mouth opening, but whatever excuse he'd prepared died when Agent Foster raised her hand. "Victor Hayes." Her voice carried across the room without effort, calm and final. "You're under arrest for grand theft identity, theft wire fraud, and federal fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Victor's face went from pale to red to something close to purple. "There's been a mistake. I'm the victim here." Agent Foster didn't blink. "You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you?" The second FBI agent, a younger man with a crew cut and a folder under his arm, approached Lorraine Hayes where she stood near the bar, her champagne flute still in hand. "Lorraine Hayes, you're under arrest as an accomplice, after the fact to grand theft conspiracy to commit identity theft and wire fraud." Lorraine's composure shattered. "I didn't do anything. This is his fault." She swung her arm toward Victor, voice rising. "He's the one who—" The agent pulled handcuffs from his belt. "You have the right to remain silent." Griffin stood frozen near Claire, his face drained of color, watching his parents being cuffed in front of 100 witnesses. Claire gripped his arm, her other hand covering her mouth. Victor, wrists now locked behind his back, made one last desperate attempt. "She set this up, Juliet Brennan. She's obsessed with my son. She's been stalking us." Agent Foster's expression didn't change. "Mr. Hayes, we have security footage of you committing the theft." "She has mental problems, I have proof." Victor's voice cracked wild and unraveling. Lorraine, handcuffed and frantic, fumbled in her purse with awkward bound hands and pulled out a stack of papers. "Mental health evaluation petition for a restraining order. She has paranoid personality disorder." A few guests murmured, glancing at me with uncertainty. Agent Foster took the papers, held them up to the light, flipped through them slowly. She looked at Lorraine with the expression of someone who'd seen this particular con before. "Mrs. Hayes, these were printed from a template website. This doctor's signature is clip art from Microsoft Office. This license number doesn't exist in the Illinois State Database." Lorraine's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "She paid to destroy us." Lorraine's voice turned shrill. "She planned this for months. She has power. She owns restaurants, jewelry stores, probably this building too." I stepped forward, voice quiet and steady. "Not this building, but I do own the restaurant chain that just acquired it." I turned toward Jasper Monroe, who'd been trying to edge toward the side exit near the bar. "Jasper, do you want to tell them about our meeting last week when you agreed to sell Bellini to JB Hospitality Group?" Jasper went pale. He said nothing. "No, then I will. The paperwork was signed yesterday. This restaurant became mine as of 6 p.m. tonight. You've been my employee for 6.5 hours, Jasper." Victor stared at me, handcuffs glinting under the chandeliers. You bought him out." "Bought him out and 3 of his other restaurants. Turns out when you're under investigation for health code violations and conspiracy to commit fraud, banks get very nervous about your loans." Agent Foster turned to Jasper. "Jasper Monroe." Jasper looked like he wanted to disappear. "Yes. We need you to come with us. We have questions about conspiracy charges." "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet, but I'd advise cooperation." The second agent walked into the kitchen and returned 30 seconds later with Santiago Rivera in tow. Santiago, still in his chef's whites, looked terrified. "Santiago Rivera. You also need to come with us for questioning related to conspiracy to poison and reckless endangerment." Santiago's voice was barely a whisper. "I want a lawyer." As the agents prepared to escort all 4 out, Victor made one final desperate attempt. "All of this over recipes. You already have everything: restaurants, money, success. Why destroy us over some old woman's recipes?" I stepped closer to him, voice low but carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. "This was never about the recipes, Victor. This was about protecting my sister from marrying into a family of criminals. Everything else, that was just justice for what you did to my grandmother." Victor stared at me, finally understanding. Bianca Conti died 6 months after that fire. She never recovered from losing the work of her lifetime. She was my teacher, my inspiration, the reason I became a chef. You didn't just steal recipes. You stole her legacy and burned it to ash. Eleanor Brennan began to cry. Paul placed a hand on her shoulder. Agent Foster gestured toward the door. "Let's go." They led Victor, Lorraine, Jasper, and Santiago toward the exit. Guests held up their phones, recording. As they passed through the doorway, I called after them. "Victor, one more thing." He stopped, looked back. "Your lawsuit's been dismissed. I'll have my lawyers file the paperwork tomorrow. Have a good night." The doors closed behind them. Griffin turned to me, his face pale and hollow. Claire stood beside him, her hand still on his arm. Naomi appeared at my other side, champagne flute, somehow still full her expression, somewhere between admiration and concern. 4 arrest warrants, I said quietly, watching the police lights flash through the restaurant's front windows. 50 criminal charges split between them. Federal fraud convictions carry decades in prison, and I orchestrated all of it while serving champagne in a borrowed apron. Naomi raised her glass. "To Stella Brennan." I clinked mine against hers. "To Bianca Conti, she taught me everything that mattered." 11:30 p.m. The police cars had left in silence, but the damage had taken shape. Bellini looked like the aftermath of a battle, empty champagne flutes, abandoned plates, and 40 shocked witnesses trying to process what they'd just seen. Most guests had gone. The core group remained Juliet Claire Griffin, Eleanor Paul, and Naomi. We sat at the main table with untouched desserts, and no one spoke. Claire finally broke the silence. So, that happened. Griffin's voice was hollow. My parents are going to prison. Probably, yes. Good, he paused. Is that terrible? It's honest, I said. They committed serious crimes. Naomi leaned forward. You can't help people who refuse to admit they did anything wrong. Claire turned to me. Why didn't you tell us about Stella, about everything? Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was making it up? Claire's face crumpled. I don't know anymore. Eleanor stood abruptly and pulled me into a hug. A real hug, the first in years. We're proud of you. We should have said that 10 years ago when you graduated from culinary school. Paul joined the embrace. We were wrong about your career, your choices, everything. Eleanor pulled back, tears streaming. You built an empire while we worried you couldn't pay rent. We were terrible parents. My throat tightened. You weren't terrible, you just didn't see me. Claire stood slowly. I was a terrible sister. Yes, you were. She blinked at my bluntness. I was always jealous, dismissive, cruel. You were. Can we start over? I shook my head. We can't start over. Tonight happened. The last 10 years happened. You can't erase that. I paused. But maybe we can move forward, if you're willing to put in the work. Griffin stood suddenly. Claire, I need to say this. She turned to him, fear in her eyes. I love you, but I can't marry you right now. Claire's face collapsed. You're leaving me. No, I'm asking you to wait for me. He took her hands. I need time. Time to deal with my family, my finances, my identity. I don't know who I am without my parents controlling everything. How long? I don't know. Months. Maybe a year. However long it takes for me to become the man you deserve. Claire's voice broke. I don't deserve anyone right now. I was horrible to your future sister-in-law. Then we'll both work on becoming better people, separately. And maybe when we're both whole, we can try again. They held each other, both crying. Naomi stood pulling out her phone. I'm calling cars for everyone. No one's driving tonight. The staff finished cleaning and I approved triple overtime plus bonuses. The head chef approached me. We heard everything. Thank you for protecting us from the sabotage. You deserve to know what was happening in your own kitchen. As we waited outside, Claire's phone buzzed repeatedly. Social media notifications lit up her screen. Oh my God, it's everywhere. The guests recorded everything. She held up her phone. Videos were trending on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Headlines, secret billionaire chef exposes family crimes at sister's engagement party. View counts were already in the hundreds of thousands. Claire's panic rose. Everyone's going to know. My job, my friends. Everyone will see this. Griffin's voice was quiet. Good. No more secrets, no more pretending. We stood in the cold October night air, exhausted. The story will die down in a week, I said. Will it? Claire asked. I was honest. Probably not. This is pretty unprecedented. The first car pulled up. Eleanor and Paul climbed in, still holding hands. Eleanor looked back at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years: pride. The second car arrived for Griffin and Claire. They got in together, still holding on despite everything. Naomi and I waited for the last car. You did good tonight, she said. I destroyed a family. You saved your sister from marrying into a family of criminals. You brought justice for your grandmother. That's not destruction, that's protection. The car pulled up and Naomi climbed in. Coming. I looked back at Bellini. The lights were off now, doors locked. I'll walk, I need to think. The car drove away. I stood alone on Michigan Avenue at midnight wind, cutting through my shirt, and pulled out my phone. The videos were everywhere. My face, my voice, my secrets, now public property. The hardest part wasn't exposing the crimes. It was sitting with my family afterward, seeing the damage that secrets had done to all of us. But maybe we could rebuild from the rubble. 3 days after an engagement party turned FBI operation, I woke up to 847 missed calls and a restaurant empire suddenly thrust into the media spotlight. Turns out everyone loves a good revenge story. The videos from the party had gone viral across every platform. TikTok. Secret billionaire chef serves champagne, then serves justice. 4.2 million views. Twitter trends. Chef Juliet. Hayes family scandal. Stella Brennan. Instagram Reels. A compilation of my reveal and Victor's arrest, 6.8 million views. The press coverage came fast. Food and Wine. The chef who owned her own venue. Chicago Tribune. Local restaurant mogul's undercover operation ends in arrests. Eater. How Stella Brennan became Juliet. Brennan became a billionaire. All 23 of my restaurants were booked solid for months. Wait times for the flagship locations stretched to 3 to 6 months. Everyone wanted to meet the secret billionaire chef. I granted one controlled interview to Food and Wine to set the record straight. Yes, I'd built a legitimate career over 10 years. Yes, I'd kept my identity private due to family issues. Yes, I'd discovered crimes at my sister's party. No, it hadn't been planned in advance. I discovered everything in real time. Yes, protecting my sister had been the top priority. The narrative took shape and I led it. At Claire's office, everyone knew. Her co-workers treated her differently now. Some were sympathetic. That must have been so traumatic. Some were nosy. Is your sister really worth $180 million? Some were jealous. Must be nice having a rich sister. Her boss called her into his office 3 days after the party. We're restructuring your position. Translation fired because of media attention. Not officially because of the scandal, but because of departmental reorganization. Claire knew the truth. They didn't want the scrutiny that followed her. Griffin met with FBI agents multiple times, cooperating fully as a witness. The agents confirmed what I'd already told him: he was a victim, not an accomplice. They cleared him of any potential wrongdoing and began the process of reversing the fraudulent accounts. Credit bureaus were working to remove the fake cards from his reports, but the damage would take years to fully repair. Griffin found a small apartment on the north side. He couldn't stay at his parents' house. The government had seized it as proceeds from fraud. Claire helped him move in carrying boxes of clothes, books, and minimal possessions. They were still close, but no longer engaged. No ring, no plans, just two people supporting each other through the wreckage. Eleanor called me every day. Awkward coffee dates at Harvest Moon where she tried to understand my world. I Googled you. You've been on magazine covers. How did we not know? You didn't ask, I said gently. You assumed I was struggling and stopped listening. She cried into her latte. We were terrible parents. You were human. You made mistakes. We're fixing them now. Paul came to my restaurants watching me work firsthand. He observed me managing staff, tasting dishes, making decisions. Pride mixed with regret in his expression. We miss so much of your life. You're here now, that's what matters. On day 3, Claire called me, her voice shaking. They let me go. Well, restructured. Same thing. I'm sorry. A long pause. Do you have any openings? I'd been waiting for this. Are you asking for help? I'm asking if you'll give me a chance to learn, to do better. Yes, but not at my flagship restaurants, not yet. Then where? I'm acquiring another property next week. Different owner, not Jasper's. It needs a complete overhaul management service culture. Lowest position available. Hostess. $15 an hour. Claire's voice was small. That's minimum wage. That's starting wage. You'll work evenings, weekends, holidays. You'll be treated like every other new hire, actually probably harder because you're my sister, and everyone will watch for favoritism. Apo, why would you do that? Because you asked. Because you're willing to start at the bottom. Because I believe people can change if they want to badly enough. I paused. But Claire, if you take this job, you work for it. No special treatment, no shortcuts. You show up on time, you follow the rules, you earn every promotion. If you can't handle that, tell me now. Silence on the other end, then quietly, I can handle it. Good. Start date is Monday. Wear black pants and comfortable shoes. You'll be on your feet for 8 hours. Juliet. Yeah. Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve. You're my sister. Everyone deserves a second chance, but only one. I hung up and stared at my phone. The notifications were still coming in: interview requests, partnership offers, cookbook deals. My family had spent 10 years not seeing me. Now the whole world was watching. Naomi appeared in my office doorway with 2 cups of coffee. You hired her. I did. You're either incredibly generous or incredibly foolish. Probably both. She handed me a coffee. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. She's going to struggle. She's never worked service industry. She's going to hate it. Good. Let her hate it. Let her earn it. That's how you built this. Naomi gestured to the office, the restaurant beyond the empire we'd constructed together. No shortcuts, no handouts, just work. Just work, I agreed. Outside my office window, Harvest Moon's lunch service was starting. The dining room filled with guests who'd waited months for reservations, who wanted to taste the food of the secret billionaire chef. My phone buzzed again, another interview request, another opportunity. My family had spent 10 years not seeing me. Now the whole world was watching. And Claire was about to learn what it really meant to work in my world. January 2022, 3 months after the engagement party. Chicago winter came in hard, and Claire's alarm at 5:15 every morning came harder. Watching my sister learn to fold napkins properly was unexpectedly painful because despite everything, I took no pleasure in seeing her struggle. Her typical day started at 6 a.m. arriving at Bramble in Bloom, the farm-to-table restaurant I'd acquired in Lincoln Park. The property had potential great location solid bones, but it had been failing under the previous owner due to poor culture and high turnover. Regina Townsend, the restaurant manager, was 45, steel-spined, and fair. She didn't give Claire any slack for being the owner's sister. If anything, she was harder on her. Everyone's watching. You need to be twice as good. Claire's morning tasks were relentless. Table setup required precise silverware placement measured distances, 4 different napkin folds depending on meal service. The reservation system, open table integration phone lines, walk-in management required constant attention. Cleaning duties included wiping down menus, sanitizing surfaces, checking windows for smudges. Claire made mistakes constantly. Week 1, she seated a party of 6 at a table for 4. Chaos ensued. Regina corrected her firmly but without cruelty. Check the floor plan before you promise a table. Week 2, she double-booked a time slot, creating a 15-minute wait for guests who had reservations. Regina pulled her aside. Every mistake impacts real people's experiences. Pay attention. Week 3, she forgot to note a shellfish allergy. The kitchen had to remake the dish, throwing off timing for the entire table. Regina's lecture was brief and pointed. This isn't marketing, Claire. People's health is on the line. Bryn Taylor, a 22-year-old hospitality student working as the other hostess, took pity on Claire. You'll get it. Everyone struggles at first. She showed Claire shortcuts how to handle difficult guests, how to read Regina's moods. Claire clung to those small kindnesses like lifelines. Lunch rush noon to 2 p.m. was pure chaos. Phones ringing constantly, walk-ins demanding immediate seating, online reservations updating in real time. Special requests, allergies, birthdays, anniversaries. Claire was drowning but kept her head above water. Then came the complaint. An older couple wasn't happy with their corner table. Claire, exhausted and defensive, snapped back. This is a nice table. Regina intervened, smoothly moved the couple to a better spot, and after they left, pulled Claire aside. Never argue with a guest. Their experience matters more than you being right. She taught Claire the proper de-escalation techniques. Acknowledge, apologize, offer solutions. By the end of her shift, 8+ hours on her feet, Claire was wrecked. Her feet ached in flat work shoes she'd never needed before months of heels. Her back hurt. Her voice was hoarse from greeting guests. She cleaned her station and prepped for tomorrow in a daze. The other staff had mixed reactions to Claire. Bryn was supportive. Marcus, a veteran server, was cautiously encouraging. Others were skeptical. She overheard 2 servers during a break. Think she'll quit, most rich kids don't last 2 weeks. Claire pretended not to hear and worked harder. I visited the restaurant once a week for routine checks across all my properties. I came during the slow afternoon period around 3 p.m. and found Claire wiping down menus at the host stand. She looked different. Simple ponytail, minimal makeup regulation uniform. Tired but determined. How's it going? I asked. Hard. Good. She looked up. Why did you buy this restaurant specifically? Because it was failing due to poor culture. The previous owner didn't respect staff. High turnover, low morale, wasted potential in a great location. And you're rebuilding that culture. Yes, and you're learning what that means, why respect matters, how hard the actual work is, how everyone matters. Claire set down the menu she'd been cleaning. I'm sorry for how I treated people before, for how I treated you. I know you are. Is sorry enough? No. Sorry is just words. Changed behavior is what matters. You're doing that. Keep going. She nodded and returned to work. After her shift ended at 6 p.m., Claire's phone buzzed. A text from Griffin. Had my 6-month credit counseling check-in today. Paid down $40K of the $200K debt. Slow but steady. How's the restaurant? Claire smiled her first genuine smile of the day. She typed, exhausted, my feet hurt, but I've never been happier. Griffin, coffee Sunday as friends. Claire stared at the message for a long time. She typed, I'd like that, then deleted it. Typed again, yes, as friends. Sent. She wasn't ready to go back, but maybe friendship was how they rebuilt. She left Bramble in Bloom on a freezing January night and caught the bus home. She couldn't afford her car payments anymore. She watched Chicago slide past the window and thought 6 months ago I was planning a wedding. Now I'm taking the bus home from a minimum wage job. And somehow, this feels more real than any of that ever did. July 2022, 9 months after the engagement party. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago was freezing despite the summer heat outside. Griffin sat to my right, Claire to my left, and we watched the people who had tried to destroy us learn what real consequences looked like. Judge Callahan presided nearly 60, steel-haired experienced with financial crime. Federal prosecutor Rachel Stern had secured convictions on nearly every charge. The courtroom was packed with media, victims, and witnesses. Victor and Lorraine Hayes sat in orange prison jumpsuits. They'd been held without bail, and 9 months of incarceration had hollowed them out. Jasper Monroe and Santiago Rivera sat separately in suits released on bail. Judge Callahan reviewed the charges. Victor Hayes convicted on 12 counts: grand theft, identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, multiple counts of document forgery. Lorraine Hayes convicted on 8 counts: accessory after the fact, conspiracy to commit identity theft and wire fraud, obstruction of justice. Jasper Monroe convicted on 4 counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful interference with business operations, aiding and abetting food contamination. Santiago Rivera convicted on 3 counts: conspiracy to poison, reckless endangerment, assault. Griffin's victim impact statement was read aloud. He couldn't face his parents in person. For 6 years, my parents used me as an ATM. They stole my identity and $324,000 total. They destroyed my credit, my savings, and my self-worth. I've been in therapy 3 times a week since their arrest. I love them unconditionally. They only love me conditionally based on my utility to them. I stood for my statement. Victor Hayes didn't just steal recipes. He stole 40 years of my grandmother's labor. Bianca Conti died 6 months after her restaurant burned, never recovering from losing her life's work. Every dish I cook honors her memory. Justice today doesn't bring her back, but it ensures her story isn't forgotten. Claire stood next. This conspiracy almost destroyed my relationship with my sister and my fiancé. It forced me to reevaluate everything I valued. I was so focused on status that I almost married into a family of criminals. This forced me to see what really matters. Judge Callahan looked at each defendant. To Victor, Mr. Hayes, you stole from your own son. You showed no remorse, only entitlement. Even now, you see yourself as the victim. This court disagrees. The court sentences you to 5 years in federal prison restitution of $400,000 and 3 years of supervised release. Victor's face went white. To Lorraine, Mrs. Hayes, you enabled every one of your husband's crimes. You cared more about your lifestyle than your son's well-being. The court sentences you to 3 years in federal prison restitution of $200,000 and 3 years of supervised release. To Jasper Monroe, Mr. Monroe, you conspired to poison customers to damage a competitor. The court sentences you to 18 months in federal prison, restitution of $50,000 and a permanent ban from the food service industry. To Santiago Rivera, Mr. Rivera, you let bitterness guide you to dangerous actions. The court sentences you to 2 years in federal prison, permanent revocation of culinary certifications, and 2 years of supervised release. As marshals moved to escort Victor and Lorraine out, Victor turned toward the gallery. "Son, please." Griffin stood and walked out without a word, without looking back. Outside, July heat hit us after the freezing courtroom. Media surrounded us immediately. Megan Price from the Chicago Tribune pushed forward. "Griffin, how do you feel about your parents' sentences?" Griffin's voice was calm. "I feel relief that they can't hurt anyone else. I hope they use their time in prison to reflect and change. Will you visit them?" "No, I've said everything I need to say." "What about your relationship with Claire?" Griffin and Claire exchanged a look. Claire took his hand, the first physical contact in months. "We're taking it one step at a time, building something real this time. No more pretending." They walked away together, hands clasped but not re-engaged. Naomi appeared at my side. Justice served, finally. Judge Callahan had sentenced criminals for 30 years. She told us afterward that the Hayes case was one of the clearest examples of familial financial abuse she'd ever seen. The sentences reflected that. Behind us, Victor and Lorraine Hayes were loaded into a federal transport van. Ahead of us, Griffin and Claire walked hand in hand toward something new. Justice had been served. The people who tried to destroy us would spend years behind bars. The damage would take longer to heal, but we were healing, slowly, one step at a time. April 2024, 2.5 years after the engagement party that ended in federal arrests. The invitation was simple, elegant, and everything the first party wasn't. You are cordially invited to celebrate with Claire and Griffin. No last names, no flashy venue. Just the people who mattered at a place that had become home. I arrived early at Bramble and Bloom. I couldn't help myself. It was my restaurant and my sister's wedding. I supervised the setup, string lights, autumn-colored flowers, despite it being spring 40 chairs maximum. A small ceremony in the garden courtyard where Claire had worked her way up from hostess. 2.5 years. So much had changed. Claire's journey, hostess to server to bartender to assistant manager. Real progression earned over 2 years. She now managed Bramble and Bloom's front of house. Salary $48,000 a year. Modest, but hers. The staff respected her because they'd watched her work for it. No special treatment. She'd proven herself. Griffin's journey, he'd paid off the entire debt. 18 months of aggressive payments, careful budgeting, no luxuries. He was now a CPA at a reputable Chicago firm, rebuilding his reputation from scratch. Therapy had helped him process the abuse, establish boundaries. He lived modestly, saved carefully, never wanted to be financially vulnerable again. My parents' journey, family therapy with me twice a month for a year. Slow, painful rebuilding of trust. Eleanor and Paul now volunteered at Nonna's Table, the restaurant I'd reopened in my grandmother's honor. They cooked using Bianca's recipes, honoring her memory. Their relationship with both daughters was better, not perfect. Real. My journey, I'd expanded from 23 to 28 restaurants. I'd bought back Nonna's original location in Little Italy and reopened it as a nonprofit teaching culinary skills to immigrant women. Eleanor and Paul worked there, connecting to Bianca's legacy in a way they never had when she was alive. I was more public now. I'd given a TED Talk about anonymous success and family motivation. The secret billionaire chef wasn't so secret anymore. The wedding began at 3 p.m. Simple garden setting, natural light, no extravagance. I officiated. I'd gotten ordained online for the occasion, and when Claire asked me, I'd cried for the first time in months. The guests, mostly Claire and Griffin's friends, restaurant staff, Naomi family. Notable absences, Victor and Lorraine still in federal prison. Release dates 2025 and 2026. Griffin had never visited them. Probably never would. Claire had visited Lorraine once early on. She hadn't returned. Both were at peace with that decision. The vows were simple and devastating. Griffin, I promise to see you clearly, not through the lens of who I think you should be. Claire, I promise to build a life based on truth, not appearances. Together, We promise to work every day to deserve this love. No mention of the Hayes family in the ceremony. The absence was its own statement. The reception was family-style dinner at long tables. My menu, comfort food Bianca's recipes. Osso buco, the irony wasn't lost on anyone. Risotto Milanese, simple tiramisu. Everything Victor had once claimed as his now served with love by people who actually knew how to make them. The toasts came naturally. Naomi, to second chances and wisdom earned through hardship. To people who work to become who they're meant to be. Eleanor and Paul together, to the daughters who taught us more than we ever taught them. To the humility to learn from your own children. Bryn Taylor, Claire's former co-worker and now friend. To bosses who become friends. To people who show up at 6 a.m. and do the real work. The dancing was simple. No DJ, just a playlist. Guests mingled naturally. No hierarchy, no performance. Claire's old marketing friends noticed the difference. This is so genuine, Claire laughed. I know, isn't it better? Before the ceremony, Claire and I had a moment alone in the prep room. She wore a simple lace dress, not designer, bought off the rack. She handed me something, a laminated employee ID card. My old manager card from that marketing job. Why are you giving me this? I've kept it for 2 years, to remember who I was so I never go back. I looked at the card. Claire's photo from back then, perfect hair designer, clothes, cold eyes. I was so unhappy and didn't even know it. You're different now. Thank you for ruining my engagement party. I laughed. That's a weird thing to thank someone for. You saved my life. I almost married into a nightmare, pretending to be someone I wasn't, ignoring the most amazing person I knew because I was too arrogant to see you. We hugged real, not performative, both of us crying. You did the work yourself. I just gave you the chance. That's all I needed. As sunset approached, I stood slightly apart, watching. Claire and Griffin danced, both laughing genuinely. Eleanor and Paul danced together, their marriage rekindled through crisis and healing. Naomi chatted with Regina, business and friendship blending. Bryn introduced her girlfriend to other guests, comfortable being herself. Restaurant staff celebrated as real guests, not help. Claire caught my eye, gestured for me to join the dance floor. I shook my head. This is your moment. She insisted. I joined them. People say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I learned something that night at Bellini 2.5 years ago, standing in a borrowed server's apron at a restaurant I secretly owned. The best revenge isn't destruction, it's truth. And the best redemption isn't given freely. It has to be earned, one early morning shift at a time. My family once mocked my failed career at that engagement party. But in the end, I didn't prove I was worth more than all of them combined. I proved something better. Worth isn't measured in dollars or Michelin stars. It's measured by who you are when no one's watching, by recipes passed down with love, by second chances you give even when they haven't been earned yet. Claire and Griffin married at Bramble and Bloom, not because it's fancy, though it's beautiful now, not because I'm successful, though the restaurant thrives. They chose it because it represents transformation, because it's where Claire learned that respect is earned, not given. Where she learned that the people serving your food are human beings with stories and dignity. And after everything, the lies, the arrests, the heartbreak, the slow rebuilding, we all finally learned what matters. Family isn't the people who see you succeed. Family is the people who actually see you, period. And now finally they saw me. The final image, 3 women, Juliet, Claire, Naomi, arms around each other laughing. A family built, not given. Earned through struggle and completely real. The dance floor at sunset. Everyone dancing, no ceremony, no performance, just celebration. String lights glowing warm. Pure joy. A family built, not born. Earned through struggle and absolutely real. Looking back at that night at Bellini's, I've learned that family betrayal cuts deeper than any knife ever could. Victor and Lorraine Hayes weaponized trust, turning their son into an ATM and nearly destroying my sister's future. Family betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It's built on years of entitlement and the belief that blood gives you permission to harm those closest to you. Here's my advice, don't be like me. Don't wait until a crisis forces you to see the truth. I spent 10 years hiding my success because I feared judgment. That silence nearly cost Claire everything. If you're holding secrets to protect yourself from people who should love you, ask yourself, what are you really protecting? God gave us family as a mirror to show us who we truly are. When Victor stood in that courtroom, he still couldn't see his reflection, only excuses. God doesn't call us to enable family betrayal. He calls us to love with boundaries and protect the innocent even when it's painful. Family revenge was never my goal, though the media loved that narrative. Real family revenge isn't destruction, it's refusing to let their lies define you. It's building something so true that their illusions crumble. The best family revenge, living well, loving deeply, and letting God handle the justice you can't. The lesson secrets rot families from the inside. Speak your truth before someone weaponizes your silence. And remember, God sees everything, the stolen recipes, the forged documents, the locked freezer doors. Trust Him when human justice feels too slow. If this story moved you or made you think about your own family dynamics, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, subscribe to stay connected, and share this with someone who needs it. Your engagement keeps this community strong. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'm truly grateful you were here. One final note. This story contains fictionalized elements created for educational purposes. If certain themes don't resonate with you, please explore other content that better suits your needs. Take care and choose what serves you best.